Mr. Buckley, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Well done for working all the tech properly. You're looking very smart there, sir. Where are you? Are you in Manchester?
I'm based in Manchester city centre, yeah.
Good. Well, Nick, for the audience that maybe don't know of you, tell us a bit about your background, please.
Yep, sure. So I'm just a kid off a council estate, brought up in the 70s, didn't go to university, went to a failing school, drifted through my teens and my 20s, didn't know what I wanted to do, was always waiting for an opportunity to come knocking on my door, but surprisingly, opportunities never knock on your front door. You've got to find them yourself.
Very true.
Early 30s, decided that I needed a kick up the backside, so I got myself a proper job at Manchester Airport. That led me to working for Manchester Council, and then I fell into my career then. So my career was looking at antisocial behaviour and working with young people to stop them getting involved in crime. So I did that for a decade, very successful, won some awards, and then in 2011, austerity hit the councils. They had big choices to make, and my job and my team were all made redundant. So I took redundancy and I used that money to set a charity up called Mancunian Way to carry on that work I'd pioneered about early intervention, getting in there early and stopping kids making big mistakes that was going to ruin their lives. And then 2 years ago, I became slightly infamous. I criticised Black Lives Matter during the peak of Black Lives Matter.
If I could reach through that camera and give you a slap across the face, I would. How dare you? Get on your knee right now. Take the knee, Nick. How dare you?
I was foolish. I actually thought at that time, I had freedom of speech and I lived in a free country. And I say it now with a smirk on my face, but 2 years ago, I actually believed that. And so I didn't write the article criticising Black Lives Matter to be controversial. I just wrote what I thought, and other people found it controversial. So then I was sacked from the charity I founded, which almost destroyed me. And then I decided I wasn't taking that. I mounted a fight back, and within 5 weeks, I'd forced the whole board to resign. We appointed a new board, and I got my job back.
Nick, what was it specifically you criticised BLM for?
There was 2 points, I think. The first point wasn't a criticism. The first point was me highlighting what they had wrote on their own website.
Yes.
So not conspiracy website, not someone else's website who was criticising them, but their own website. Mm-hmm. Defund the police, disrupt the Western nuclear family, overthrow capitalism. I just talked about all the points they said were their aims. Mm-hmm. The biggest the number one complaint against me really was, how dare you as a white man comment on a black organisation? That really was the complaint against me.
Yeah, and I mean everything you said, of course, is accurate about BLM, because of course a lot of people seem to think that there is an organisation called Black Lives Matter that Patrice Cullors and others set up, and the organisation itself has been proven to have been a mafia-type organisation that basically shook down money from corporations and then used the money to buy houses and pay themselves exorbitant salaries. So, you know, there is Black Lives Matter, the slogan, and then there is Black Lives Matter, the movement, and the two are entirely different. And
I'd go one step further and say there's actually 3 Black Lives Matters. Mm-hmm. There's the phrase, which I've never met anyone who disagrees with that phrase. Mm-hmm. Of course, Black Lives Matter, just like everybody else is matters. So that's the phrase. Then there was Black Lives Matter, the movement. Mm-hmm. And that's when we had lots of fools all over the country who felt sorry for black people, which is quite condescending, and we need to march on the streets for them because it must be awful being black, you know, it must be awful. And then it's the organisation Black Lives Matter, who are basically criminal race grifters.
Yeah, and they've been exposed for that quite extensively now. I mean, they're finished now. The actual organisation itself is finished. But as you say, Nick, it really did give you an insight, I suppose, into just how vicious I mean, I remember it frequently. I remember what happened to you, Nick, and the way you went after. And this is what the media do: is they like to take somebody and make an example of them. It's like the equivalent of shooting a hostage, and the entire juggernaut came after you, and it was horrible to watch at the time.
It was. To be fair, it wasn't mainstream press. I don't recall any mainstream press not even picking it up, because it was a big story in my life at the time.
I remember it. I remember it big. Maybe that's just me, but I remember it being massive.
It was online. Thousands of people. But again, when you look at someone set a petition up to have me fired, that only got 400 signatures.
Yeah,
and that was online. You can get 10,000 signatures for just stating your date of birth, and people will disagree with you. You'll get 10,000 signatures for that. But don't worry, I mean, it was absolutely horrendous at the time. And what the big surprise was, I got no support.
Yeah.
No one came out publicly who knew me, who worked with me in different charities, different organizations.
Yeah.
No one came out and said, I'm not having this. Nick Buckley's a great guy, or Nick Buckley might be flawed, but he's no racist. I had messages like that, but all those messages ended
publicly.
Ended with, I hope you understand, Nick, but I can't say this online because I'm scared for my job. I'm scared they're going to come for me.
Doesn't really sound very much like a free country, does it, Nick? Where people are scared to say what they really think.
That was my big lesson of 2020. I realised then that I was slightly naive, that I was a free person living in a free society. If only I had the right views, then I had freedom of speech, then I lived in a free society. But if you didn't, then you weren't free and you didn't have freedom of speech. And that really opened my eyes to the evil. We use evil quite a bit, but it's a type of evil. It's totalitarianism. It's authoritarianism. It's that sense that you will do as you're told.
Yeah.
And if you don't do as you're told, we will make an example out of you.
Well, we've been extremely outspoken over the last 2 years over COVID as well, and that really was used as well. I mean, we're not going to overly get into the behind that, but that was used again to discipline people, to say that you have to act in a certain way. If you don't, then you're risking lives. You're dangerous, and it is a vile culture that these people have created in such an intolerant society as well. And I mean, I look at your stuff on Twitter, Nick, and it's good because you're not afraid to speak out on issues like demographic replacement, which is big up on the LGBTQ plus agenda. And there is this revolution taking place before our very eyes, but if you even dare just mention it, then it's, let's shut this guy up.
Yeah, and you need to be clever, and that's what I tried to do. I tried to have sensible discussions, and I put out sensible tweets. They may be controversial, people may not agree with me, but I tried to have a bar that I won't go under, because the last thing we need to do is give our enemies ammunition to use against us. So I try to be sensible, I try to be professional, I try to be polite and respectful. And, I challenge people to find a tweet of mine that isn't polite and respectful. You may not agree with it. I may even be wrong. I'm quite open to the idea that I'm wrong, because who am I in the grand scheme of things? So the odds are I'm wrong on lots of things, and I'd like to be corrected on those things, because my journey isn't about me being right. My journey is about, I want the truth. And if that means I have to be corrected and shown the truth, then good on you and show me the truth. And I'm quite open and willing to change.
And I think it's interesting as well, Nick, because, you know, we are, as an alternative new media organisation, we are very, very sceptical of the agendas that they push. And you've called out Boris Johnson, Ben Wallace. It's amazing how these people, they all love anything rather than to escape this country and grandstand on a stage, whereas, you know, you are a guy for a career who actually tried to intervene and help young people. And Nick, see when you were helping young people who were in a life of crime, did you prioritise white people over blacks? Did you prioritise straight people over gay people?
Absolutely not. You know, my work has been across Greater Manchester. You know, it's the inner city. We would work, and we still do now. You know, my charity, I'm not really involved in charity anymore, but my charity still works with anybody who is on those streets who wants help. And a lot of time I refuse to answer these questions because it's playing in the hands of those other people. Mm-hmm. I refuse to answer, do I treat homosexuals the same as straight people? I refuse to answer, do I treat different races differently? Because my philosophy is, I don't think anyone's a racist or a homophobe. Mm-hmm. I think they're all decent people until they prove me wrong.
You see, what I was trying to get across, obviously I'm asking it as a leading question. I would never think for a second that you would do that. But these leftists would actively discriminate against people if you were white. And the statistics now show that the demographic that is performing the most poorly in schools in England are white working class males. And then likewise,
we've known this for a decade.
You had the grooming gang scandal, which again was predominantly white working class girls, and because these girls were down the pecking order, nobody had anything to say about it. And it's vile. It is vile.
It is, and that's because we, as a society now, prioritise victimhood over other things. And the last thing we want to be called is an ism or a phobe.
Yep.
And sometimes it works. Yeah. It works against other groups of people. The reason why we have young black men dying on the street, especially in London, in pools of their own blood, is because to tackle that issue, whoever wants to tackle it will be called a racist.
Correct.
So therefore, all the professionals and the senior police officers go, let them kill each other. Because I'm not having my career effect. So it can happen to white girls with the grooming. It happens to young black men in London. We've started creating a group of people who we're treating differently, which means by definition, some laws don't apply to them anymore. And we're going to hell in a handcart with this. There'll be a backlash if we don't get a grip.
I often point this out, that you can be anti-immigration or anti-mass immigration without being anti-immigrant. You know, like the two aren't mutually exclusive. And history has proven that when you create multicultural societies that have no rule of law, just a free-for-all, it ends badly. And I'm sorry, but that's just history. And as you quite rightly point out, you know, we've had people on before who from the black community who do give honest answers on issues like fatherlessness in black communities, crime, the rap scene, the encouragement towards that way of life. But you're right. It's easier to watch people stabbing each other than actually be called a racist. Like that's how insane it is. That's how it was. Well, and I know this isn't funny, Nick, because look at where you live. People didn't stop Salman Abedi, despite him walking about with a bloody massive backpack, who then killed scores of innocent children because they were worried about being called a racist.
I wrote a book about all this year and a half ago. It's called Lessons in Courage. You can get on Amazon and bookshops anywhere. And the book starts off with my story. I've told you about what happened to me. But what the book is really about is about all this. It's about cowardice. Mm-hmm. That's the pandemic we're suffering from in our country. It's a pandemic of cowardice.
Yep.
That we can look at somebody carrying a backpack and thinking, people have reported him to me being suspicious, but I don't want to talk to him in case I'm called a racist. Well, we have young black men being stabbed to death and we don't want to do anything about it. When we have girls being raped and people don't want to do anything about it. And it's all down to cowardice. Mm-hmm. And it's how do we tackle this? And, that's the question we need to ask society. How do we stop? Mainly men, because it's one of our traits, and it's how we've been designed. One of our traits as a man is to protect society, to protect women, protect children. When there's an emergency and danger, who do you think shouts women and children first? It's not the women shouting it. It's not the children shouting it. We shout it because we have a duty to protect our tribe and protect our family. And we need to start tapping back into that. And that's disappeared over decades because of feminism. Feminism has beat all this out of men. They've told us for decades now, half a century, we're as good as you, we're strong as you, we don't need your help, don't open the door for me, toxic masculinity, man-spreading, man-splaining. And men have gone, all right, well, I'm not going to treat you like a woman anymore. I'm going to treat you like I treat my friends. And that's what they've made us do. And because of that, our society is falling down. If you don't have strong men in society, you have a weak, failing society. And we need to reclaim.
Unfortunately, Nick, Boris Johnson even spoke today about toxic masculinity. And that's the Prime Minister of this country, who is supposed to be a conservative, using extreme hard left talking points of something that isn't real. So, Nick, I mean, obviously you've been attacked like this, and a lot of people like you. But so why is Nick Buckley not in the House of Commons right now? You're a guy who's got an MBE. You've set up a charity. You've worked on the streets. Why aren't you right now in the Houses of Parliament talking about stuff like this?
Because our country has not yet hit the lows that it's going to hit. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, the vast majority of people still think we're okay, my life's okay. So they're still voting for the same way they were voting for decades. I stood last year for Mayor of Greater Manchester against Andy Burnham, and I got something like 4% of the vote. So his share went up. So people actually voted more for him. Mm-hmm. And in the 5 years he's been mayor, rough sleeping hasn't been solved, which he said he would do in his first 3 years. Still got rough sleeping 5 years later. Greater Manchester Police goes into special measures under his watch because they've been warned every year for 4 years and still haven't improved. And you ask people, what's Andy Burnham done? And the answer is he's done nothing in 4 or 5 years. But more people went out and voted for him.
But that's because the entire mainstream media, the BBC, Sky, ITV, will put Andy Burnham up on a pedestal and make him out that he's one of the good guys. You know, that's like the caliber of people now in politics is exactly where those above them want them. They are weak, they are easily blackmailed, and they crumble at the first sign of pressure. And it's just brutal. It really, really is, Nick. It's brutal when you see like boring, dull careerists like Burnham where he is.
It's part of it is incompetence. I'm not saying Andy Burnham's incompetent. I'm just saying in politicians in general, there's a big section of politicians who are just incompetent. And then we have the other section of politicians who have chosen politics as a career.
Correct.
They went to university, did politics or media studies. They then start helping an MP. They're then a paid helper. They then get given a safe seat. They then get elected. And the career politicians. And 50 years ago, you would judge a politician on what they've achieved.
That's right.
We judge a successful politician today by how many years they've been in Parliament.
Exactly.
And that's the wrong measure. You can be in Parliament for 30 years, achieve nothing. And the answer is, well, what was the point of you going?
Yep.
But the point of them going was the next election. Because that's
right.
all they care about, the next election.
And they give this notion that there's this huge political chasm. But on the major issues, none of the political parties really disagree about anything. Like, during COVID, there was a couple on the Tory benches. Nobody spoke out. Nobody even asked questions, regardless, again, of the opinion on it. Nobody even asked a question. Ukraine is even worse. There is not one single MP who's had the guts to stand up and just say, well, is this the right strategy? You know, I'm not saying they need to offer another strategy, but not even one person stood up and said, are we sure this is the right thing? And then on the issue of mass immigration, you know, the Tories were elected on a manifesto pledge to reduce net migration to this country to the tens of thousands. An additional 3.5 million people in the last 10 years. It's like there's been more immigration, illegal and legal, under the Tories than there ever was under Labour. Yes, it started under Labour, but Labour said that they were for it. The Tories said they were against it. So it leads you to a conclusion. What's the point in even voting for these parties?
For those parties, you're right. I wouldn't vote for Labour and I wouldn't vote for Conservatives. People need to start looking at some of the, not Lib Dems either, the Lib Dems are mental.
Yeah, they are.
But start looking at some of the other small parties. You know, I'm a member of Reform UK, but then, you know, you've got Reclaim. If you're more left-wing, then look at the SDP. They're a great party. If I was more left-wing, I'd be voting for them. And that's what you need to do, because I know Brexit's not perfect, but that's how Brexit came about, was UKIP and a Brexit party.
We really need proportional representation. We need the electoral system altered. I mean, I personally now I'm through with politics, but I do admire people like yourself that are still fighting. But even just to think that we had someone in Parliament offering an alternative, I mean, it is absolutely vile. So, Nick, I just want to pick up on one thing before I let you go, because I don't want to keep you for too long. You said that things will have to get a lot worse before they get better. What do you see happening?
This financial crisis we've got at the moment, I think it's going to get worse. I can see people on the streets, not necessarily because it's got worse, just because the far left-wing lunatics want people on the streets. This woke agenda is not going away anytime soon. When it starts hitting people in the pocket, that's when people really start to sit up and notice. So that's what is going to have to happen before people start changing their voting habits and seeing and wanting a better tomorrow. Because even though it looks bad today, it's still an amazing country. We still have a fantastic quality of life here. We may complain that we can't buy the new iPhone, but we've got last year's iPhone. They're not real problems. Real problems were in the 70s when I was growing up, when we know electricity strikes all the time. My house lit by candles because there's no electricity. People, 3 million, 4 million unemployed, riots on the streets with mounted police. That's when you realize your country is failing. And don't get me wrong, I don't want that to happen. I'd like to think we can solve it without going back to that. But it's only when you get those serious things that people start going, oh, my life isn't that great, and maybe we need a change of leadership. And sometimes it just takes the right person. No one thought Margaret Thatcher was going to be an amazing leader. Most of her party didn't even want her. Churchill was seen as a joke before he became prime minister. His career was over. Nobody liked him. Nobody wanted him in Parliament. So there could be somebody in Parliament at the moment, or someone who's going to get elected very soon, who will change things. Cometh the hour.
I think I agree entirely. I think the major obstacles towards that, though, are the mainstream media. The mainstream media is basically the enemy because they are entirely the same. The social media companies that have basically censored anybody that speaks out, and then the political system. If there was freedom in the media, freedom in these things, then there is a chance that people can emerge. But I think obviously, Nick, you've seen it. You'll know that a lot of good people, people kind of know what's going on, like they do. But as you say, right now they can just kind of pretend. They can go and watch the football. They can go and have a pint. There'll come a point where they can't. Nick, you've got an event coming up on the 30th of July. Free Speech Matters. What's that? What's happening then?
Yeah, so that's going to be in Manchester City Centre. You can get tickets on Eventbrite. So if you just go into Eventbrite and then search for Free Speech Matters Manchester, our event will come up. I've been talking about this for a couple of months. So I've had many discussions like we've had today. And a lot of it comes down to free speech. Having the ability to talk about the things you want to talk about, even if you're right, even if you're wrong, even if you're a lunatic, you still should have the right to talk about the things you want to talk about, because many lunatics in history turned out to be right. Galileo, for instance. So just because you're a lunatic today doesn't mean you're a lunatic tomorrow. So this event is all about free speech. It's not about topics. It's about what is free speech, why do we need it, and how do we protect it? And we've got lots of guest speakers, Free Speech Union, Carl Benjamin from the Lotus Eaters, Peter Whittle from the New Culture Forum.
Peter Whittle's a good
I'll
guy.
be speaking. So we've got some good speakers coming along.
I know it's this is very controversial and brutal, but people who actually believe in free speech, studies have proven, tend to be of a higher IQ, and unfortunately we are now very much a low IQ society. And as you point out, people throughout history who spoke out against the agenda, who offered they were crucified, burned at the stake, thrown to the lions, and much worse. And actually that's what made society progress. And I know you kind of feel the same, Nick, but I remember growing up the hope that people had in the sort of the 90s, things can only get better, the early 2000s. I see humanity on the downslope. I see this country very much on the downslope, and it's not pleasant. But good guys like yourself, and you've got a lot of respect, Nick, and others out there. Hopefully we get to a point where you are allowed in the mainstream conversation, because again, what history teaches is that, like, I would say you're quite a moderate person. When you have one extreme, if you silence the moderates, it will be another extreme that will counteract. And, well, that's what happens. That's what history teaches.
I would also say we've been here before.
Yeah.
The UK has looked like it's been down and out many times before.
It's true.
And we've always made a comeback. You can't see it sometimes when you're living through it.
It's true.
But I'm very confident that we will turn this corner, and this last decade or two will be seen as a blip in our wonderful 1,000-year-old history. But for it to change, we're going to need people to want it to change. And that's all we can wish for, is people want it. Because if people want it to change, it will change. If people don't want it to change, then it turns out that me and you are wrong, and people will get what they want. It just isn't what we want.
Nick, absolutely brilliant. I've been putting in your Twitter link. Everybody, please give Nick a follow. And Nick, we can keep in touch. And everyone is like you. As I said, I remember that story vividly and thought how vile it was. So I'm sure everyone supports you on your quest, and hopefully some people can go along to that event in Manchester. So thanks again, Nick. Please keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Anytime.
Good night. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.